sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavaditam astu mahavidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May our work together be fruitful and energetic. May our study also be enlightening and strengthening. May we not unnecessarily, of course, carry with each other. And peace, peace, peace be unto all. All right. So there's a question that we have with regard to Shishya-Guru relationship. And it's derived from Gospel of Ramakrishna. It seems to be from, if you're looking into the Gospel of Ramakrishna, it looks as if it is a conversation dated 24th December, 1883. So just to summarize, and I'll see whether I have summarized it correctly, I don't have the text in front of me, is that it seems that the Shishya in his spiritual effort has a little bit of sadhana to do, and the Guru really is doing the lion's share of the work. However, at a certain point, in terms of timing, the Guru it's necessary for the Guru to pull back and reserve and allow, and we put it in this way, God's grace to flow through by itself, and the examples are given. The timing of an egg hatching, that is a bird's egg hatching, and also another analogy of cutting a tree down at the very last moment. No cutting is necessary because it falls by itself. Then the question arises, and I'll put it in a slightly fun way, well, if the Guru is doing everything, then we can enjoy an easy life in terms of spiritual practice. We can relax, and the Guru can just do everything. But then you miss the point that at the last moment, something else is taking over, and the Guru has to step back. So we have to understand what is meant by Shishya, what is meant by Guru, and what is required for this, because we are assuming that the Shishya has done some preliminary work. So it's not quite as simple. We are taking for granted that the Shishya is a Shishya. What's the definition of such an entity? In order to approach a teacher to start with, we are told, even from the ancient texts, and in every case of the Upanishads, a student comes to a teacher with fuel in hand. That is a symbol, please enlighten me. And we have seen from the preliminary prayer, the peace prayer, designed to give us a nice equanimity of mind, a preparation for our study, that even then certain conditions are necessary. We can't have an argumentative nature, for example. Otherwise, be fighting with your teacher all the time. Then there has to be an understanding that there is nourishment and protection from an entity that is within and beyond both Shishya and Guru. And so in all cases, when the Shishya in the ancient days arrives at the destination, which is called Guru, wherever that Guru is, the Guru will give a certain resting period, evaluation period, on the basis that if the mind is in an idle state, or the mind is in any event not directed, particularly in any way, with problems occurring and questions occurring, there is some thinking entity behind in the unconscious mind that deals with the problems. And while brushing the teeth, for example, some solution comes, what I have previously referred to as the 20th elephant, that arises. Within us, there is a creative capacity waiting, as it were, in the wings, and comes out at an appropriate moment and guides the mind towards a possible solution to a problem. That is, there's some entity in us that has a churning capacity, churning up various possibilities in the mind, until eventually we get an aha moment. That's it. a moment of inspiration. In the language, in the yogic language described by Swami Vivekananda in that wonderful text, Raja Yoga, he describes it as a kind of insight into a superconscious mind. And we explored yesterday or the other day, sometime we explored anyway, that it seems our consciousness, our mental consciousness is divided into three areas. Unconscious mind, where instinctive activities take place. Learned activities entrenched in the unconscious area, so we no longer have to think of it. For example, driving a car. We no longer, once we have practiced for a few years, we are no longer worried about how the car will go, because seemingly automatically the gears get shifted, the feet operate by themselves, and we can be driving, and we can also be thinking over another subject matter, but there's some element kept in reserve that is alert. Then there is the conscious mind. We're using it hopefully now, reasoning, thinking, evaluating, deciding, and we are fully aware of what is happening in this moment, and it is time orientated. And then there is the superconscious mind. That is the moments of inspiration, and in the yogic language, all the energy normally dispersed everywhere is now going through a special channel called Sushumna. And then, if you are doing this in a systematic, cultivated way, in other words, sadhana, spiritual practice, then an awakening in the superconscious mind takes place. Yogic language, Sushumna. Sushumna opens up, a kind of energetic ojas, as it's called, enters into that area. And if you don't do it systematically, then it happens accidentally, and there's a great danger in that. And in Raja Yoga in brief, that section in the book Raja Yoga, the dangers of this is described, because it can lead to confusion, superstition. So there has to be some systematic effort. And we are assuming that it is on the part of the seeker, the spiritual practitioner, and there's no mention of the guru in this. Nothing whatsoever. It is all your own independent practice. But it is taken for granted in all these texts that there is a spiritual guide, and the Patanjali Yoga Sutras themselves indicate that these are brief headline subjects that stimulate a memory of a conversation with a competent teacher and a student. So it is taken for granted that a guru is necessary. It is taken for granted that the seeker, the shishya, the disciple, the practitioner is prepared and is ready for a teaching. This is all taken for granted before anything. Taking this for granted, what then is the effort required? But let's step back again and see what are the qualifications of the student and what are the qualifications of the teacher. That has to be evaluated. Because today there are many people who proclaim themselves as gurus. And personally speaking, I think this has generated a bad flavor, because some of the most commonly misunderstood terms that we have today in modern, you can say, even new age understandings of ancient and deep spiritual truths would be this idea of guru, the idea of karma, the idea of yoga, and meditation. So if you're agreed, I'll try to revalue and redefine these terms to make a better understanding. And where we have a confusion, it's much better to put a vernacular term. All right, let's start off with something I didn't mention. A spiritual practitioner, somebody interested in spiritual life, we can summarize it as seeker. And everybody falls into that category. Everybody actually is a seeker. Now, what are you seeking is an interesting question. And what comes to mind actually is a wonderful story from the Chandogya Upanishad, where Prajapati is faced with, having made a statement, is now faced with two seekers. But the quality of the seekers is different. In brief summary, we'll go into the story in greater detail. But having understood that you can obtain all the worlds available and you can attain all the desires that you have, then you can seek something where you don't have old age, a condition like that. You never go hungry or thirsty, all of these things. You have access to immortality. Naturally, everybody's interested in that. That means every human being on the planet is a seeker. So what is a shishya? Not just a mere seeker, but somebody who has understood the formula for doing it. And above all, has a great thirst for truth and knowledge. Knowledge not in an academic or intellectual sense, but wants to know what is the substantial thing that sits behind everything? What is the ground of my being? And when we have these Vedanta question and answer sessions, many questions can arise, but somehow few questioners. But there are many questions that everybody has. We can't take for granted that the world is sailing on without understanding where do we live. Now, I'm not talking about your house. I'm talking about other things. The body is also can be considered a housing. What is the nature of that? When you go to a doctor, you go from largely an ignorant position. And many people get told many things by a medical doctor, a GP, a general practitioner, without questioning. Why should I do this? Why should I take that? Why do you say this? What is the reason for your diagnosis? And the doctor's quite happy because they get paid a fee and you're in front of the doctor for maybe 5 minutes and a prescription is given and off you go to the pharmacy. And no questioning. And when you go to the pharmacy, no questioning either. So there are many outstanding questions to do with our dwelling place. We live in a universe that we barely understand. We are told from modern cosmology with great certainty, unwarranted certainty, that we only know about 4.5% of what is there. But when you analyze it correctly, half of that we can't find. And yet we are required to believe it. So it's important to know, where do we live? Even a mild passing curiosity surely is warranted. When we look into the sky and take for granted the moon is there, sun is there, and that there are other shining bodies there and there's darkness, we should at least be curious. Where do we live? We should at least be curious. How is it that the body is such a wonderful complex mechanism? And we should be surely curious, at least at a basic level, how a cell operates. We should at least be curious, is there a purpose and meaning to life? The question, what is life, is an outstanding question. The great scientist Erwin Schrödinger asked this question and developed a series of lectures from it in around about 1940 here in Dublin. And asked this quick question, what is life? Of such significance that many conferences, subsequent conferences celebrating that, postulate many answers to this question. What is energy? What is life? Is there a meaning? Who am I? Yesterday, we dealt with the Kena Upanishad. The first question, in summary, amounts to that. Who am I? What am I? Is there an agency somewhere? What is that agency? And then the great expose of this question is explored. So, what is the mind? How does it work? And is there an afterlife? What happens on death? Some say there's existence, some say there's non-existence. So all of these are meaningful questions. Now, if you have a thirst to answer these fundamental questions about mortality, immortality, and so on, then this is the driving force to make you a shishya, an inquiry, as opposed to a mere seeker, a mere somebody who wants some kind of curiosity and may think that they'll find it in a text, in scriptures. We are told in the Katha Upanishad that this is not found in the Vedas. This is not found through intellectual thinking. This is not found through all of these methods and means, no. Actually, through the grace of a fundamental self, do we get these answers. So we have to invoke something called grace. So we now have three components. We have a sincere inquirer with a thirst for the answers. And because of that thirst, is prepared to do some preliminary work of purification. Has an element of discernment. Because of that, an element of detachment from this world. And has at least some level of self-control that is put in as qualifications for the shishya, the spiritual aspirant. 6 treasures in all. Basically, a certain moral and ethical way of living that involves an attitude of contentment, cultivating that. An element of control of the senses. A certain attitude called tiksha, forbearance amidst sufferings. So like that, faith and so on. So like that, several qualifications are there. Now, we'll pick up this one qualification of faith. What does this faith mean? It means I have faith that all the resources around me are reliable. A fundamental faith that one of those resources will be a teacher. And so let us look now at this other side of things. What are the qualifications for a teacher? And let's go back to bringing colloquial definitions for these terms, guru, etc., karma, and so on and so forth. Let's deal with that. What is a guru? Because from the 1960s already onwards, this term has fallen into bad repute. Because with people's naivety and this idea of Oriental ideas coming because people are looking for something a little different, this idea of guru has fallen into disrepute. So why don't we avoid this term completely, understanding what it really is? Competent teacher. What makes a teacher competent? A teacher has to have at least an understanding of the purport of scriptures. That doesn't mean to say they have to be literate at all. We take the example of Sri Ramakrishna. We take a more extreme example of Latu Maharaj, Swami Purnananda, who had absolutely no education whatsoever, no capacity for reading or writing, and was quite happy with that because all of the discoveries were internal. So 2 things were there. The grace, apart from the preliminaries that I mentioned, the grace of the best guru in the world, the most competent teacher. What made this teacher most competent was the fact that he understood the purport, that is, the essence of the Vedas, the central truths from direct experience. Secondly, there has to be some entrenchment, some establishment in Brahman. What does that mean? It means that the vast majority of their thoughts, their words, and their deeds are aligned to the highest principle. And the highest principle is what we're inquiring into. And then there has to be no motive for gain, no satisfaction of desires that makes them like any other person, no charging of fees, no desire for wealth, and more importantly, humility. That means no desire for recognition of status. Renunciation of wealth is fine, but can you renounce this desire for recognition and status? In other words, somebody who has conquered egoistic traits and tendencies. Somebody who is prepared to make their ego an open channel for divine grace to flow. How powerful is that divine grace to flow? Enormously powerful. And this is what Sri Ramakrishna is talking about. Because he is referring to divine grace that flows through this guru. And it's not that the guru is doing all the work. From the guru's point of view, the guru is being an open channel for divine grace to flow. And we know that this grace is something like a wind. And Ramakrishna is using this example. The wind of God's grace, divine grace, is always flowing. We have but to set our sails. Therefore, the Shishya has the minimum requirement of setting the sail. But don't underestimate the difficulty in it. Anybody who's gone sailing will know that there are ropes to be tied to a mast. Never mind about that. A mast itself has to be erected. And then the sail has to be controlled. And the sailor has to know how to maneuver the sail into the wind. You know, in sailing, there's no straightforward path. You have to align the sail to the wind, and the wind may blow you to the left or may blow you to the right, and you want a course which is straight. So you have to make your general trend straight by zigzagging, tacking it's called, aligning your sail to the wind continuously. But there's no doubt that if you have a sail, and if you have a boat, and if you have a mast, and if you have the capacity to breathe and blow, no amount of blowing on the sail will move it. Our minimum effort is only raising the sail, but the wind itself takes it. And if the guru is an open channel for God's grace, divine grace to flow, then that is the medium through which this flow of grace occurs. Then just going back to some definitions to complete that. When we talk about karma, we should try and replace it with sowing and reaping. When we talk about meditation, we should rather replace it with a game of guiding thought that removes all these difficulties, all these misconceptions, misunderstandings. Because we've heard so many misunderstandings about these terms that karma invokes a form of fatalism. No, it's quite the opposite. It is entirely up to you to forge and shape your own future destiny. That is called karma. It's based on a causal law, that every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. And we're living in a deterministic world where it's entirely up to you to maneuver and change and direct your own attention, your own thinking capacity. That is entirely up to the Shishya to do. The Guru cannot do it for you. You alone have to do this. And then, of course, having resorted to a teacher, a competent teacher that is, and one which is suitable to you. The Guru is described like this in establishing the easiest possible way for spiritual practice. A chosen ideal has to be there in Bhakti Yoga, and that chosen ideal is identified by a competent teacher because of that teacher's alignment to the cosmic mind, what we call God. And when you take on a teacher, the selection of the teacher has to be there, as well as the teacher's selection of the student. And so we find many examples where somebody has said, I won't give you an initial urge, because you see, this teacher-student relationship occurs through diksha, a kind of initiation that means putting you on an initial step, not the last step, not giving you everything. Here's an initial step. But you have to carry out the rest yourself. There's a responsibility you have to do. But compared to divine grace flowing from and through the Guru, it is of no consequence. It's very, in comparison, see, very small effort. Raising the sail, that's all your job is. But if the Shishya does not carry out the Guru's teaching or instruction to the letter, then unfortunately it falls on the Guru. Because the Guru's one motivating factor is love. That's all. Why else would they be doing it? Why else would they take on the role which is better and which is more significant, not better, more significant than that of a biological father and mother? Taking on all the responsibilities for you, trying to lead you to a condition of immortal life, immortal existence, trying to show you the glory of your own intrinsic self. That is the Guru's responsibility. The Guru is a faucet or a tap through which divine grace flows, and something like a connection to a reservoir of grace called cosmic mind. And the pipeline on the way is a lineage. And the selection that every student has is, first of all, may we inquire, what is your lineage? What is the pipeline, please? That's an important thing, an important factor. And then, of course, are you a suitable student? Do you have at least some semblance of these four qualities? A thirst for freedom and truth. Do you have that? A thirst for God. Do you have it? Do you have an element of understanding of the principles that this world is not a permanent dwelling, that there is something permanent? That is viveka, discernment. Do you have the capacity to revalue things? Do you at least know this in principle? And do you know, to the extent that you don't have any element of importance stressed on the material world that we find around us, including the human body? And then do you have certain qualities of purity, determination, contentment, faith, all these other qualities that I mentioned? So there's a selection, a mutual selection. I often tell people when they go for a job interview, it's a mutual selection. Don't think that the interviewing panel is looking at you only and selecting you. They are doing that, of course, but you also need to select them. You also need to ask them questions and go through a selective process. Is this the right job for me? Is there a match? Is there a suitable match? So sometimes people say, oh, you need to go to that teacher. But it may not be a suitable match for you. And that is to do with timing. It is to do with opportunity and timing. And the timing is not ours. The timing is divine timing. There is something behind you, the divine itself, pushing you forward from inside and pulling you from the outside. That we can summarize as divine grace flowing. And so there's an element of so-called destiny in this. Not fatalism, but divine destiny. It's different. That says, this is the most suitable teacher for you. This is the match. And the Guru then becomes a matchmaker. Here is your Ishtadevata. And here is a suitable mantra, sound embodiment for it. And I will vow that I will look after you for the rest of your days and the rest of your life, even beyond your mortal days. And what you suffer, I'm prepared to suffer. Your victories are my victories. Your disappointments are my disappointments. And my insights will help you guide. That's the Guru's position. So you can see, if the guru, so-called, the competent teacher, is not so competent after all, then we have to select somebody much more competent. And so there's a divine selection that comes on both sides, a suitability that has to be borne in mind. So the intention and the love of the guru is never surpassed, because that guru will always have your interests. And even though you may not be in any contact with the guru necessarily for some time, it is still a fact that the guru is looking after you, is praying for you, is doing japa for you if necessary, has you in mind all the time. A concern for you has to be there. And for this reason, it is all the guru's effort in that sense. But don't think that the shishya should take a holiday. There is no holiday in spiritual life, because spiritual life is time dependent. Every contribution toward samskaras, unconscious impressions, is a response to every thought, every word, and every action. And what are these? What is the time frame for these? Every second. And if every second is not occupied and steered and geared towards spiritual life, it is a waste. Now, is it possible to do it? Well, in the beginning, no, it's not possible. That is why the Bhagavad Gita in the 12th chapter tells us, here's what you need to do as a devotee. You need to fix your mind on God. But is it easy? So Sri Krishna tells Arjuna that if you can't do that, there's another alternative. Abhyasa yoga, practice, constant remembrance, practicing the presence of God. Whenever the mind wavers and goes off in a direction, bring it back, bring it back, bring it back. Do it patiently. Don't do it with any anxiety and anticipation that's self-destructive. The idea is to make the mind calm, to make sure that the waves are settled and not disturbing to you. And so don't be anxious. Don't think that you'll get some future result from your spiritual practice, because spiritual practice is primordially catching what is here and what is now, tuning the mind into this present moment where that divine sits here, now, not in the future. Equally, if you have past regrets, the mind being idle, something comes up. So spiritual practice is a question of occupying the mind in a conscious, deliberate way, tuning the attention constantly into that divine. That is spiritual practice. Don't think that there's no effort in it. But on the other side of things, God's grace is flowing. They're flowing through the scriptures, flowing through the guru, without which the scriptures have no real meaning. And flowing also in many other ways, the capacity for your thinking, the capacity for your breathing. Now, at the end of the day, every competent teacher will tell you this. The real guru is your own mind. When you begin, you think the guru is an embodied entity. But as you progress in spiritual life and practice it with steadiness and with commitment and with the great, great enthusiasm and keeping it up and understanding that there will be moments of dips. But Swami Shivananda, he would tell us, Mahapurush Maharaj, a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, will tell us that don't worry about the dips. Think of an ocean, because the dips in an ocean are the prerequisite for a great giant wave, a great peak. And so don't worry about the dips in the spiritual life. As long as your intention is steady, as long as your practice is steady, as long as you pick yourself up in the negative moments or the moments of momentary lapses due to various factors. Health can be one of those, or decline in health can be one of those. pick yourself up and with renewed vigor, go forge ahead and take advantage of the resources around you. What are these resources? I mentioned the divine grace. I mentioned the guru of the mind is a resource without which you cannot manage. The grace of the competent teacher itself, the grace of space, the grace of time, and timing and timeliness. All of this is God's grace flowing toward you. It would be very silly if we didn't take advantage of it, but silliness is part of the biological human nature we have, and we have to accept it and make sure that from day to day we are less silly and less childish. It means less egoistic, less egoistically driven, and become more like a competent teacher who uses the ego as a glorious open channel, open avenue, like a flower opening, and for the benefit and welfare of all beings. So naturally, it's a much more expansive effort. And as we develop more and more this habitual practice of spiritual practice itself, we realize that the guru itself is the mind. Now we don't have a single mind. We don't have an individual mind. When we say mind, we have to also understand there is only one mind, and that is cosmic mind. And so it is this cosmic mind. It is God. It is this personal God. It is this creative aspect of the divine that is the real teacher. And when this teacher manifests, when this cosmic mind erupts, as it were, and materializes in order to balance disharmony, in order to do away with elements of and tendencies of degenerations, which we call adharma, establishing dharma from age to age, it comes. And we can clearly see these milestones, these interjections in human course of life. And these are the great avatars. These are the great incarnations. And there is no greater guru than these. No greater guru whatsoever than these. And those have been fortunate to sit at the feet and get the opportunity of these giant waves, as Swami Vivekananda describes them, that have their impact for thousands of years to come. A Buddha, a Jesus, a Rama, a Krishna. And for us, if you want to take it like that, a Ram Krishna. So these are the giant waves. And so this again is God's grace, giving us an opportunity, flowing and saying, did you notice this? Did you notice me? And even there's a timing to it. Now let's talk about the relationship between the embodied guru, the competent teacher, and the student. Vivekananda, in determining his last day, he makes a remark that is equivalent to saying that the teacher should not be with the student always. Even in the old system of ashram, where at the student stage of brahmacharya, after some 12 years of study, that student has to go back and engage as a good citizen in the social environment around him. And he can only do that with the entrenched dharma, that principles of harmony, morals and ethics and pure life that has been undertaken for the last 12 years or odd. Several years living in the house of the teacher and his wife. Going off, we read the Taittiriya Upanishad, we find specific instructions, wonderful instructions for the student to make sure that all the training, all the character building in the Gurukula system is being carried out in the world of social interaction and wealth creation, another aim of life. But do it with all the morals and ethics that you've been taught in the world. Carry on. Don't stop your study. continue with your spiritual progress. And then you'll find that, as Prajapati has said to his two students, Indra and Virochana, in the story in the Chandogya Upanishad, that you see, you now can have all the worldly things also. That is, you can have all the worlds at your disposal, but would be misused if you don't have the moral training. And not only that, but all your desires will be fulfilled. Legitimate desires will be fulfilled. Because where does the fulfillment come from? It comes from a cosmic mind. That is this creative dispenser of everything that you have. The whole world comes from it. Like asking a favor from a minor government official sitting in a civil service office, doing the same thing day in and day out. And as I'm speaking, I'm thinking, you see, Swami Purnananda and myself, we went to the social service offices to try and get some PPS, a social service accreditation, a social benefits accreditation. And the two of us approached the counter of a civil servant, and whether she was in good or bad mood that day, I think it was permanently like that, because we went a few times and the same person was there in the same mood. And was very abrupt, very rude. Well, why did we go there? If we had access to the president of the country, or to the Taoiseach, the prime minister, or to a higher official, if you have access to the Lord of the universe, then where else will you go? Go straight there. Why not? Don't go to the minor offices. Go straight to the dispenser of the entire world, who sustains everything from within. Why not? So that's the point. So this is the cosmic mind, which also embodies itself from age to age and time to time. And we have readily access to it, because the only mind, the only broadcasting station is that cosmic mind. What we call my mind is only a small transistor radio that we can tune into it. And that is also the wind of God's grace blowing. So with that in mind, and with a little time to spare, let's tell a story. And I suppose from time to time, we have to tell a story which begins with once upon a time. So I will try and tell the story as briefly as possible by beginning once upon a time. Now, it really begins with a statement, see. So the whole universe is one. That's how the story begins. In tune with once upon a time. And there is only one entity, one self. What do we mean by self? There's only one identity in this universe. Only one existence. And that one existence, when it passes through the forms of time and space and causation, it gets called by different names. Everything in the universe is that one, appearing in various forms. And therefore the whole universe is all one in the self, which is called Brahman. And that self, when it appears behind the universe, is called God. And the same self, when it appears behind this little universe, the body, is the soul. Now, I am actually quoting from Swami Vivekananda here. So let us try to summarize. One existence is there, appearing as many, because it is something like a lamp. If you have a light bulb, and you put a series of koshas, a series of different layers on the top. Let us say that these layers are fabric layers in a lampshade. Not knowing anything better, we can assume that the light is coming from the lampshade. And in the example I'm using, the lampshade would be the human body. And when we look at it in a wider way, it's the entire universe. We can see the entire universe as something like a body. Behind that, peeping behind that, is this immortal self that we call also Brahman, implying that it has an infinite expansiveness and never ends. It's an infinite invisible. And so, in order to understand this, because our understanding is mired in our view, our perception of the universe, which gives us a misinterpretation, thinking that all life is really coming from the lampshade. And that's all there is to it. Then it becomes very puzzling and also very painful. When the lampshade goes, that is, the body goes, then we think the entire person is gone. And if we have an element of hanging on to existence, we might ask the question, where does this light go to when the lampshade is gone? Misunderstanding that, when you uncover all the layers, the light, that steady flame is there, and it never came, and it never went, and it was never extinguished, and it was never lit. So Prajapati tries to teach this principle to two students. He starts off by saying, the Atman which is free from evil, free from old age, free from death, free from sorrow, free from hunger and thirst, whose desire is of the truth, whose resolve is of the truth. He should be sought, him one should desire to understand. He who has found out and who understands that self, which we call Atman technically, attains what? All the worlds and all the desires. Now the common seeker, that is every human being and every being thereafter, and in any dimension, will want these two things. We'll want all the worlds and we want all desires. So that's a good prize. So they're interested in it. That is how spiritual life begins. Spiritual life begins with, we somehow feel there's an internal void. Some gap inside me is there, and it requires filling. Naturally, with the senses looking outward, Kathopanishad, then I naturally think that these rewards will come from the outside. But here Prajapati is saying, actually it's coming from a self, and the self is always internal. So naturally, there's a keenness to understand what is this. And so, both gods and demons heard this proclamation, and Indra, who's the chief of the gods, came as a student, and Virochana, among the Ashuras, those representing ignorant tendencies, they both approached the creator, the Lord of all creatures, God, Prajapati, highest teacher you can come across. We all come from you, we are your sons, so you alone will know this teaching. And they said, we've heard that the Atman has to be known. The Atman that is not touched by any blemish or old age or death or sorrow or thirst or hunger. The Atman whose desires are always true, whose resolutions are always firm. Please instruct us about this Atman. Now they've just described the central desires that people have. Nobody wants to get old. Nobody wants to fall sick. Nobody wants any blemishes in their character. Nobody wants to suffer from hunger or thirst. And so all these desires have been described, desires of the common seeker. And they want something that is true, something that has some lasting value. And so what does Prajapati ask them to do? It asks them to be spiritual seekers, spiritual practitioners. And so what are the prerequisites? He asks them to practice self-control, strengthening the will, called the austerities. and celibacy. Now, for how long? You'll be quite surprised. 32 years they have to practice this. And only then will they be qualified to ask the question. So Prajapati asked them to practice austerity and celibacy for 32 years. And then says the Purusha, he gives the answer to their question. So after 32 years, he's prepared to give an answer. The Purusha, the self, visible in the eyes, reflected in the water or in the mirror, is the Atman. Go and look there. Look at yourselves in the water, and then let me know what you see. Naturally, they went and did this, and then they came back. What did you see? Well, we saw the whole body. Both of them relate what they saw exactly. And Prajapati then asked them, okay, go and dress up in a different dress, change your dress, and go and look at the image again. And then tell me, being well-dressed, decorated, what do you see? And they came back and we saw an image dressed up. And Prajapati then tells them, this is the Atman that you seek. Both of them went away satisfied. But Indra had higher moral training. So on his way back to report to the rest of the devas, this is what we are told. Virochana went and told the Ashuras, this is what we were told. The difference is, Virochana went to the Ashuras and said, the body is the self. Eat, drink, and be merry. And be satisfied with that answer. And what characterized them as Ashuras is they accepted it. Indra, on the other hand, while he was on the way, started thinking. The qualifications, that is defeating hunger, thirst, and all the rest of it. It doesn't make any sense. Now, when you go to a teacher, you don't get told the whole thing in one go. Because a competent teacher acquires a competent student, but the student also acquires a deeper understanding step by step, not all at once. And according to the capacity of the student, the teacher will tell you something which is not untrue, which is true as far as it goes, but there is more to explore, more to explore, more to explore. Just like indicating the story of, here is the moon, can you see the moon? Nowhere. Well, first, you see the tree in front. Yes. You see the branch. Yes. You see the tip of the branch. Yes. Look beyond it a little bit. I see the moon. Yes. So step by step, these truths have to be revealed. So when they did this, Prajapati asked them, what did you see? And so on and so forth. And so then Virochana went back to the Ashuras and proclaimed, the body is the Atman. Serve it well and you will obtain all your desires here and hereafter. That is true. But you'll also, along with it, you won't get over sorrow. Nor will you find the true answers, fundamental answers of a lasting nature. This immortality you won't get. So to this day, people generally say he is a demon when a person has no charitable nature, no faith in the supernatural realms, who never worships the forces of divine graces, forces of nature, otherwise called the devas, who does not perform sacrifices, that is worship, or even is not self-sacrificing, that is, who is selfish and body-centered. When you ask somebody, who is that person, you think of them in an embodied way. But that's not the real entity. Getting hooked up with that and involved in that, we are prepared to insult and become insulted and feel grief as a result. All our human relationships get upset with one or two words. That's how strong our sense of embodiment is. You're looking a little fat today. What? For the next 20 years, you go on a diet thinking, oh my goodness, people think I'm fat. See how associated we are with this stuff made from yesterday's bananas and milk. Those who identify with the body and think that the body is very valuable and cater to its whims, falsely thinking that it is the true self of man. In other words, those who identify themselves with the body and worship it, these are called asuras, the children of Virochana. Now let us follow Indra. As a result of living a right type of austere life, Indra became endowed with intelligence and the power of discernment, which is the absolute requisite for a student. And on his way back, he reflected, if the Atman becomes lame, if the body is lame, and the blind, if the body is blind, and is well-dressed, if the body is well-dressed, and is destroyed if the body is destroyed, I don't see any good in that teaching. I don't see that as the ultimate. Let me go back to the teacher Prajapati, the Lord of all creatures, who has all the answers, and put this problem to him. And so he went back to Prajapati, who asked him to live a life of celibacy again. For how long? Another 32 years before he's qualified to understand the next stage. My goodness, we don't have to wait that long, but we may have to wait for some 64 lifetimes to get to the next stage. So he goes back and gets the answer after 32 years. Yes. He who moves about, says Prajapati, as the Lord in a state of dream, is the self, the Atman. Indra again reflected on the way back and didn't see any merit in this either. But can you see how the teacher is leading the student? Because the body we can only experience in the waking state. But 3 states of consciousness are available to us. And so Prajapati is leading him to the next phase of our so-called reality, the dream world. In the dream world, we can surely fly. But if you try it without wings or without an aircraft, then you will hurt yourself, particularly if it's from a considerable height. So he goes back to Prajapati because he says, Prajapati is telling him that though this dream, Purusha, is not affected by any damage to the body, yet at times he's being chased or hurt, or that Purusha feels pain or weeps. So I can't see that the self is this dream body. This certainly cannot be the self, he reflects. So he has to go back to Prajapati again. And after another, yes, you guessed it, another 32 years. And then the self in the state of deep sleep is the Atman, is the reply. Immortal, fearless, he is Brahman. And then again, Indra again expressed doubt. What is the doubt? You see, in a dreamless sleep, no bodies are there, but a state of seeming peace and contentment is there. Surely that's the self. But he goes back and says, after reflection, the self in the state of deep sleep is the Atman, immortal, fearless, he is Brahman. No, the self is not affected by dream or damage to or destruction of the body, but it seems not to know itself and is, as it were, dead in this state of deep sleep, not knowledgeable. It doesn't know this state of sushupti. I do not see any real good in this. So again, he goes back to Prajapati. And then, all right, he gets time off because he's quite close to the truth. To stay, practice this self-control, the celibacy, live as a student. Brahmacharya, student, means also celibacy for 5 more years. And so he lived the spiritual life for a total of 101 years all told. Don't tell me that the life of a student is easy, or you have to relax. The inquiry itself is energetic. So this indicates that one should devote, if necessary, one's whole life for spiritual practice, at least a total of 100 and beyond, 101 years. So at last Prajapati found Indra fit to receive the true teaching and instructed him O Indra, mortal indeed is this body held by death, but it is the support of this deathless, bodiless Atman. Truly the embodied self is held by what? Pleasure and pain. Surely there is no cessation of these two opposites, pleasure and pain. For one who is embodied, but pleasing, or these two things, pleasure and pain, they indeed don't touch one who is bodiless. So even the dreamless sleep has to go. And how do you describe such an entity? What is bodiless? Can we ever get any understanding of space? Yesterday, I told some devotees, do an exercise for me. Gaze around at the environment that you find here. Now close your eyes. Now recall what you saw. Now please remove space. And you leave it for a time. Then you open your eyes now. Right, what did you find? We couldn't do it. Because all the things that we saw rely on space. If you remove space, you remove all the objects. How can you possibly do it? So is there some example? Yes, the air. You don't find any body in the air, yet you feel it. And the air has an all-penetrating aspect to it. It goes everywhere. White cloud, lightning, thunder, these are all bodiless. Now, as these arise out of beyond the sky, reach the highest light and appear, each with its own form, even so this serene one, the self, rises out of this body, reaches the highest light and appears in his own form. That is the highest person. And there he moves about, laughing, playing, rejoicing. And rejoicing with all kinds of objects and all kinds of pleasures, not remembering this body in which he was born. As an animal is attached to a chariot, even so is the life attached to this body. We're describing a spirit of life, spirit, if you will. Now, where the sight merges in space, inside the eye, that is the black pupil, there exists that which is the person in the eye. And yesterday we were discussing this in the Upanishad. In answer to the question, who am I? What am I? What is the agent? And there's one simple answer, it is Brahman. But what is that? It is the eye of the eye, the ear of the ear, the speech of the speech, the mind of the mind. It begins with the mind. And so the person in the eye is only for seeing, and he who knows, I smell this, that is the Atman, the one that is behind all of these. And the nose is for smelling, and he who knows, I speak this, is the Atman. That is the final knower. The organ of speech is for speaking. And he who knows, I hear this, is the Atman. The ear is for hearing. And he who knows, I think this, is the Atman. Now, we had a great discussion of this over lunch yesterday, or just after lunch, because there's one person who didn't really understand this and thought that the observer of all these activities is the mind. Who notices the physical things? The mind. Couldn't get beyond that barrier. Couldn't get beyond the understanding. Certain activities are happening in the mind. Who is noticing that? Do you remember what you said 1 minute ago? Yes. Who is the one who's recording it? Bringing it back to the conscious awareness. This is the self. It is behind everything. And so he who knows, I hear this is the Atman, the ear is for hearing. And he who knows, I think this is the Atman, the mind is his divine eye. Through this divine eye of the mind, he truly sees these desired objects which are in the Brahman world, and he rejoices. Truly, this is the Atman. And even the Devas have to worship that. Therefore, all the worlds and all the desired objects are held by them. And so that is why you obtain all the worlds when you know it, and all your desires. And he obtains all the worlds, all the desires, who having known this Atman from the teacher and the scriptures, understands it. Now there's a great moral to the story. Some people criticize Prajapati, saying that he's deliberately misleading the students by not speaking of the Atman outright. This view isn't correct, of course, and he was leading his students gradually from the lower, progressively to the higher state of understanding. That's a good teacher, because a good teacher always suits the teaching to the receptivity of the student. I was talking to two people yesterday, and one person was of the intellectual type. The other one was more of the emotional type. How to deliver an appropriate message for both. You have to advise them, each accordingly. Please take what I have to say according to your understanding and leave off the rest. Accept what you can and leave off the rest. And that is both ways. The intellectual person do the same. Accept what you can, leave off the rest. So afterwards, I had to repeat that because the person said, I can't understand all this, space and time and all that stuff, But when I go out in nature, I get an uplift. Yes? Go a little deeper, because what is behind what you are seeing and what is behind the object that you're seeing? If you see the beauty of a flower, why is it? It's because there's an inner beauty manifesting in this way, in it, through it. As it, understand it's also beyond it. And so this becomes clear also when we reflect on the life of Sri Ramakrishna, because he used to say that no one could achieve anything until the right time comes. And then here comes the example. That is, a mother bird will not break open the shell until the chick is fully formed and is ready to come out. And here, right time means acquisition of fitness to receive what is given, not laziness. Something had to be there. And so we can also recollect that Ramakrishna awakened the spiritual consciousness of many of his devotees. And he did this on what we call the Kalpataru Day, 1st of January, 1886. And by his divine touch, he awakened everybody. But on that day, he didn't bless two devotees. And he said, they will have to wait, but they will receive his grace later on. About timing. And we may also recollect that Swami Vivekananda was also not able to withstand Sri Ramakrishna's touch on his first visit to Sri Ramakrishna, on his first visit to Dakshinazar. And so also, Mathu Babu, he couldn't sustain the ecstatic state granted to him by Sri Ramakrishna. And so in the same way, the same teaching was given to Indra and Virochana. And while Indra's education continued, Virochana's stopped. His progress also stopped because he didn't reflect on the teaching properly. Both are students, but one reflected properly and one didn't. You can't say the Guru will correct it. The Guru will give the teaching. You accept the teaching and you understand it according to your capacity and according to your aspiration, according to your purity of mind, according to your sincerity, your receptivity. But austerities are necessary. In both cases, they had to undergo austerities. Austerities purify the mind. And that's the only way to develop receptivity. The Guru cannot do it for you. So both Indra and Virochana, they were both asked by Prajapati to live the life of the celibacy. And for 32 years, in the first case. And both of them did it as they were instructed. But Virochana was unable to grasp the teaching clearly. And just as we can infer the cause by looking at or observing the effect, we can guess that though Virochana did perform austerity, it didn't serve the purpose because he couldn't grasp his teacher's words rightly. That also was necessary. So we come across many instances like that. Ravana, for example, was a meditator. Narkasura, all these performed rigorous austerities. But instead of making their minds pure, their austerities only intensified their worldly desires because they strengthened their will, but their will was directed towards desires and their objects. That's the difference. And so as a result, of course, they did immense harm. And they had to be vanquished, ultimately. So we have to develop concentration. And without some amount of mental purity, that concentration will actually harm others. There has to be that purity of mind and intention. So we have now exceeded our time by about 15 minutes or so. So I hope I answered your question. And
thank you, Swamiji. It was beautiful.
Okay. Then, of course, we have something in chat. Let me just see. What is the book you're reading from? So this comes from Sindhu. So which book is this? This Prajapati story. Prajapati is from Chandogya Upanishad. Chandogya Upanishad. So it is it's the 8th section. It's the 8th chapter, and it is the 7th section. And the story there is Prajapati's instruction to Indra concerning the real self, of course, to Virochana as well. All right. Then just a small announcement before we depart, that the next Enneagram and Essence of Truth is scheduled for 17th and 18th of July, with the second part on the 7th and 8th of August. So those who haven't been on it, I suggest that you subscribe to it. I think we have many, many testimonies to see what the value of this was or is. And if you have been on, maybe you know somebody who's interested, and then you can tell them all about it and see if they can sign up. All right. And then, of course, in between, we have an event on the 25th, which is a Sunday. 24th is Guru Purnima, talking about Guru. But we will be celebrating on the Sunday, which is the 25th. And the program will be out probably tomorrow. So on both these things, on the Enneagram and also on the Guru Purnima event. We'll finish off. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.